All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another kickoff for Context in Code Hawks. Very excited to have you guys all here. Today, we have Beanstalk, which is the context that's about to start in Code Hawks. So, we're very excited to get here Guy, who's quote unquote operations guy, and then Brandon, who's been more of the solidity part of the project. So, just to introduce myself, if you haven't been to one of these before, my name is Juliettech. I'm the head of DevRel for Cyfrin. And today we're very excited to dive deep into Beanstalk and the amazing work that they're doing with the contest that's about to come up. So, Guy, if you want to introduce yourself, then Brennan, feel free to just share a bit more about what you do and what your role is here at Beanstalk.
Amazing. Thank you, Juliet, for the introduction. Hey, everyone. I'm Guy. I work on Beanstalk with Breen here, and just want to start off by saying thank you all very much for considering spending your time securing Beanstalk code. We've had a lot of success with these sort of decentralized, incentivized security programs, particularly with Immunify historically, and very excited to see how this CodeHawks audit goes as well.
Amazing. Thanks, Guy. Breen, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm Breen. I'm one of the Solidity developers for Beanstalk. Just wanted to echo Guy's sentiment as well. We're very excited for everyone to be here and audit this new Beanstalk code. So very excited for all the questions and excited to dive in.
Nice. Let's get started then without further ado. Guys, so Beanstalk. Beanstalk is a permissionless fiat stablecoin protocol. Could you share a bit more about what this means and how you guys are thinking of the project?
Well, what a fabulous question, Juliet. Okay, so why don't we break down permissionless fiat stablecoin protocol by term? I assume that most of y'all are familiar with stablecoin protocols. A stablecoin being, a token that is designed to oscillate around, be roughly worth some value peg. In most cases, the U.S. dollar, and that's also true of Beanstalk. But the couple other interesting parts of, this is this term we use to refer to Beanstalk as permissionless fiat stablecoin protocol, is the permissionlessness. This one is probably somewhat unsurprising, and I think like a lot of you folks are interested in developing, working on, and securing permissionless technology. And particularly in the case of stablecoins, I'm sure most of us are familiar with stablecoin implementations like US Circle's USDC, Tether's USDT, etc. And I think that stablecoins have a lot of potential for the greater adoption of DeFi, but our thesis is that they will struggle to until there are more permissionless options. And finally, perhaps the least obvious one as far as what it means is fiat. And we tend to refer to fiat as, in the case of stablecoins, a stablecoin that is inconvertible or not redeemable for some underlying collateral. So, in the real world, there are plenty of examples like this, like the US dollar since the 70s has been a fiat currency since it is no longer redeemable for gold. And in the case of a lot of stablecoins in crypto, on Ethereum, etc., many of them are not fiat stablecoin implementations are redeemable for some underlying collateral, whether that's dollars in a bank account, Ether, etc., etc. So those are the few things that make Beanstalk at a high level.
Nice. Love that. And then actually stems quite nicely into the next question that I have, which is regarding that collateral requirement. Your product is very innovative in that it doesn't require any collateral to be added and instead uses credit to create the bean price stability relative to the value of the peg of $1. Could you share a bit more about how you're able to offer this in your protocol?
Sure. So some of the terminology we like to use as far as whenever a stablecoin is backed by collateral is that collateral is what gives the stablecoin its value, and that value is extrinsic or exogenous to the protocol itself. So if you take an example of sub stablecoin backed by Ethereum, that stablecoin is deriving value from the Ether itself. Whereas if you have a fiat stablecoin or an endogenously valued stablecoin, it has to derive its value from somewhere else. And in Beanstalk's case, Beanstalk uses credit. What does credit mean? In Beanstalk's case, it's its ability to borrow beans from the market, particularly in the case where the bean price is below $1. As you can imagine, the easier half of the problem to solve is when the bean price is too high. Beanstalk can unilaterally mint beans to increase the supply and drive the price down. The harder half of the problem is how to increase the price of bean whenever it's below $1. We probably will get into some of those details later, but at a high level, that's the theoretical basis for Beanstalk's existence, is its ability to attract credit, attract lenders of beans whenever the price is too low.
All right, nice. And do these contracts fall within the scope of the audit? From what I was reading, in large part, it's mostly focused on the Sun and Silo components. I'd be interested if you could share a bit more about the scope of contracts that are in this audit, and particularly the Sun and Silo components as well.
Absolutely. So as far as these components of the farm or Beanstalk goes, Beanstalk can be, abstractly or from the perspective of trying to understand Beanstalk, it's helpful to break it down into a few different components. And we refer to those as the sun, the silo, the barn, the field, and a couple others, but those are the big ones. In the case of this audit, what I was referring to about Beanstalk's ability to borrow beans from the market, the field is Beanstalk's credit facility, and in this case is not super relevant to this audit. As far as the sun and the silo goes, happy to spend a couple minutes talking about each of these, but maybe just to mention it, these abstractions or components are not necessarily how the code is divvied up, although they do have their own directories. A lot of these components, have shared libraries and such, but again, from the perspective of trying to understand the different components of the system, I think it's a helpful abstraction. Okay, so a few things. Let's start with the sun. What is the sun? In Beanstalk, the sun can be thought of as Beanstalk's timekeeping mechanism. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the ways that Beanstalk tries to reduce the price of bean whenever it's too high is by minting beans, and vice versa when the price is too low. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about soil in the future, but soil is what Beanstalk mints to attempt to return the price back up to $1. And the sun, in Beanstalk's case, or to rewind a minute, in the cases of minting beans and soil, in a perfect world, if Beanstalk controlled its own execution environment, this peg maintenance mechanism could be continuous, like every block you can imagine. But of course, Beanstalk is deployed on Ethereum, and there are various trade-offs it has to make due to the costs of being on Ethereum. And in the case of the sun, there's a function that can be called once every hour or season, in the case of Beanstalk's notion of time. And every hour when that function is called, it's called the sunrise function or the GM or good morning function if you prefer. And that function will measure, for example, among other things, the time-weighted average price of a bean over the previous season or over the previous 60 minutes to determine how to adjust itself. So, Beanstalk is a monetary system that is designed to be totally autonomous. And so it'll measure various parameters every hour and then determine how to adjust itself. And for example, some of those things include how many beans to mint, how to change its interest rate, et cetera, et cetera. And particularly as it relates to this audit, the sun will determine how to issue stock to various depositors in the silo, which happy to walk backwards and define stock a little bit as we get into the silo. So that's the sun at a high level. The silo can be thought of as the Beanstalk DAO, and the DAO is permissionless to join. Anyone can purchase and deposit particular assets on a whitelist into the silo at any time. That whitelist includes beans, LP tokens where beans trade in, etc. And once you do that, once you deposit beans or specific LP tokens into the silo, you acquire stock. And stock and stockholders are DAO members, and they make up the silo. Stock entitles you to a couple things. It entitles you to voting rights, and it also entitles you to earn a portion of bean mints whenever the sun mints beans at the top of the hour. So that's the 3-minute version. Happy to go into it if there are more questions later, and obviously we'll be in Discord to answer any questions.
Nice. Thank you so much, Guy, for that higher level overview. I'm wondering if you have the code at hand and would like to maybe go through some of those functions and share a bit more of the nitty gritty of what you've just explained. I'm sure that'll be helpful if you have it available.
Sure, defer to Breen there on if there's particular parts that he wants to highlight with regards to the audit.
Yeah, would love to. Let me share my screen real quick.
Get into the juice.
We love the juice.
Nice. Some water to the soil.
Exactly. Then maybe that'll become a Beanstalk term later.
There you go. You must credit. Breen, let me know, and I'll be happily put up your screen share up. Yep. Nice.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep. Solid.
All right. So in regards to the audit, I guess the best place to start is this new library called libgauge. But I guess to go on a higher level, Beanstalk is deployed on a Ethereum network using the Diamond standard EIP 2535. This allows for us to kind of extend the contract size. As you know, on a Ethereum network, there's a finite contract size and a very small one that each contract has to adhere. The Diamond standard allows us to kind of deploy multiple contracts that are called facets and, do certain parts of the Beanstalk network. So, in referring to the audit, the main 2 facets we're focused on are the sun facet and the season facet and the silo facet. In regards to the season facet, there are 2 things that are upgraded in this update here. Beanstalk is this continuous protocol throughout its lifetime, has gone through upgrades. So while this isn't completely new, there are parts of the contract that are new. In this case, it's these 2 lines here, these 2 new libraries, libgerminate and libgauge. The bigger one would be libgauge, so let's start with that. Libgauge is the newest update to Beanstalk, which we dubbed the gauge system. Currently, silo assets or whitelisted silo assets issue a certain amount of stock to each asset. These assets are determined upon a governance vote and currently are static. It's become apparent that there's a need to be able to adjust these parameters, not only based on the current system, but autonomously. So what this libgauge system does is that, let me go to the actual function here, is every season upon the sunrise function, it evaluates its state and then readjusts the incentives for each asset. For example, there are times where Beanstalk wants to incentivize more liquidity in its protocol, and thus will increase the amount of seeds or amount of stock issued to LP depositors. Sometimes there's a need to decrease the rewards between LP and beans, and thus more seeds may be attributed to the bean token itself. From our perspective, the best way to kind of distribute these stock is not by manually calculating, right? But instead autonomously with the system evaluating itself here. So the step gauge function is the biggest function here, but this step gauge function is separated into 2 parts: update gauge point and update ground stock earned per season. The update gauge point here, is the part where it evaluates the current state and then updates this parameter called the gauge points. So for context, Beanstalk does this two-layer distribution of new stock. First, it evaluates the state and thinks, or I guess evaluates how much percentage of stock should go to Bean and how much percentage of stock should go to LP. Right. From Beanstalk's perspective, that's a very important distinction for peg maintenance. Beyond that, Beanstalk then goes to the second phase where it then distributes the LP between its seeds to the various LP assets. That, while isn't a significant peg maintenance, $1 of a non-Bean asset is equivalent to any $1 of a non-Bean asset. It does seem important to be able to distribute the seeds based on, certain criteria such as decentralization, scalability, and various other things. But given that it's not very autonomous, it's something that the DAO still at the moment has to kind of consider, what percentage of the Beanstalk should be exposed to this specific LP asset. But at a high level, that's what this function does. And once it calculates, the gauge points, updates the system, figure out, okay, how much stock should be issued to each asset, then this function here, the upgrade grown stock earned per season, just reallocates that stock asset. I'm gonna stop here just for a couple, if there's any questions, but if not, I can keep going on.
Nice. Yeah, I don't see any questions coming up now. So if you want to just keep going, I'll let you know if anything comes up.
Awesome. Now, the second part of the season update is called the Germination update. Now, for context on why does Germination exist, or I guess, what is Germination, it's good to kind of understand the problem. In reference to the gauge system, there's a need to measure how much deposited LP assets there are in the gauge system, right? And that's how Beanstalk evaluates how much stock should be distributed to each of the LP assets. From the initial audit, Cyfrin pointed out that when we were calculating, or querying this data, it was the instantaneous value and thus can be manipulated. For example, if someone wanted to indirectly affect how much seeds are distributed, they could deposit a significant amount of an asset right before the sunrise function, call sunrise. Beanstalk would evaluate its current state, sees that a significant amount of LP deposited, readjust the seeds, and then in that same transaction, the attacker could also withdraw, thus affecting the system with and causing an inefficiency in the system. Thus, there seems to be a need to add some time-weighted component to the system, especially for these measured values. Obviously, there's a trade-off between accuracy and manipulation resistance, but seems like a very good trade-off in this instance. So Germination was developed to kind of solve this issue. Now, Germination, how it works in practice is that new assets coming into the system, mainly by deposits, are introduced to this warm-up period. While a deposit or a new asset is deposited in a system, these assets are not considered "quote unquote" active until 2 seasons have elapsed. And once 2 seasons have elapsed, then 1, their value is counted towards the total deposited value, and 2, their stock becomes "quote unquote" active, meaning prior to the germination or during this freeze period or this germination period, they are not eligible for bean mints. Now, I guess to kind of go on why we had to choose 2 seasons, ideally we want to minimize the amount of time these guys or new depositors have to wait in order to get new bean mints, and reduce the amount of time it takes for the system to get the data, right? But it does seem that a 1 season delay or 1 hour delay can be manipulated. Thus, for example, a user depositing right before sunrise, right? Meaning that the data is only 1 block stale rather than, an hour stale. So it does seem that a 2-season delay is needed here. But going on to more of the nitty gritty here, Beanstalk stores the value or the deposit values both on a user level and a total level, right? So on a system level and a farmer level. Germination occurs both on the total level and farmer level. The thing about it is that, the total level can be, it's synchronous to every sunrise, right? Whereas the farmer level only is synchronous to whenever a farmer updates their silo, whenever they interact with the silo. Thus, there are kind of two germination states at play here. And I can go on, but I think there's a lot of other content we have to go through in the scope of this audit. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to talk.
If it's
Sorry,
all right,
Russell?
maybe I'll jump. If it's all right, maybe I'll jump in real quick because I know a lot of these folks are new to Beanstalk. So maybe I'll just and maybe some of this is already clear, but just to highlight it and talk about it from a theoretical perspective for just a second. When you deposit assets into the silo, again, those assets are on some particular whitelist. So let's say you deposit beans or you deposit some LP token into the silo. That'll net you a couple different types of assets. First, stock, which we talked about earlier, and second, seeds. And seeds, every season, grow into more stock. And one of the things we hadn't covered yet, which I wanted to mention briefly, is that why does stock exist? What's the point? And there's a few different answers, but one of them is that with a fiat stablecoin, with a stablecoin that's not backed by collateral, when the price goes below $1, there is some incentive to exit the system, to withdraw your beans from the silo and dump, driving the price down further, because there's no, sort of you can think of this as a mini bank run, if you will. And stock exists to mitigate that fact. And so you can think of stock as a time-weighted staking mechanism in the silo, where the longer you stay in the silo, the more stock you get. And again, stock is what entitles you to 1, voting rights, and 2, a portion of bean mints in the future, where your percentage of the stock ownership determines how many of those beans you get. So that's the reason stock exists. And then with the gauge system that Breen is referring to, let's walk through a specific example. So say the whitelist in the silo is 3 assets. It's beans, bean ETH LP tokens, and bean USDC LP tokens. And let's say the DAO, when it votes to say, okay, the optimal distribution of bean liquidity is 90% in bean ETH and 10% in bean USDC. And let's say the current state is actually 80-20, not 90-10. And so the sun at the sunrise call will distribute more stock to Bean ETH LP depositors in order to incentivize more people to deposit in that silo rather than the Bean USDC silo. So that's a little conceptual overview, if you will.
Thank you. Yeah, that's super helpful. I think this is a great time to kind of bring up the elephant in the room, which is that Beanstalk's function calls, state variables may have some funky names related to the metaphors. So maybe Guy, Breen, if you want to take us through some of those key names that people should be looking out for when they're diving into the code base, I think that'll be super helpful for people auditing the repository.
Absolutely. I don't think Breen or I can necessarily take credit or blame, if you will, for the for the initial names of all the variables. From my understanding, it was sort of like a lightning in the bottle moment where, if you consider, we haven't talked about pods or debt at all, but the technical term for pods would be, a term that's like 10 words long. So eventually we had to define our own terminology. But for the purposes of this audit, we'll talk about a few of them. And again, we have a glossary. We're very take a lot of pride in our documentation. So if you see anything missing, please call us out. As far as this audit goes, we talked about the sun. and how the GM/sunrise function updates the sun every season or every hour, a season being 60 minutes long. And we talked a little bit about the silo and a few different things. We talked about how there's a whitelist of assets you can deposit in the silo. You can deposit beans in the silo, beans being the stablecoin, the permissionless fiat stablecoin that Beanstalk, the protocol, issues. Talk about the silo being the DAO, and you can deposit whitelisted assets into the DAO, into the silo. Let's see, what am I missing? As far as the silo goes, we talked about stock and seeds. And one thing that's fairly relevant to this audit and the silo generally is conversions, which is the ability to swap from one particular asset on the silo whitelist to another. Although convert's not really a farming term. But I think that some of the other ones, like you'll find in the docs, like fertilizer, pods, etc., are not particularly relevant to this audit, but always happy to answer questions about them. I think that covers most of the silo and sun ones. Breen, am I missing anything?
There is a flood component to this audit, but
The flood. How could I forget the flood?
yes.
Okay,
But
so
other
yeah,
than
the
that,
flood. So Beanstalk, from a philosophical perspective, generally does not take any market action itself. It simply attempts to influence individual market participants to buy beans, sow beans, deposit in the silo, et cetera. There is one instance where Beanstalk does take market action, and it mints and sells beans directly on the market, and that is called the flood. And that happens in particular extreme circumstances where the debt level is very low and the bean price is very high. This is actually the lack of this type of feature. If you look at a lot of other previous credit-based stablecoin attempts, whether that's empty set dollar, basis cash, et cetera, in 2021, et cetera, those pumped to $40, $50, $60 right at launch. And in the case of fiat stablecoin, the higher you go, the lower you go. And so the flood is something that prevents that sort of pump, if you will.
Okay, nice. Thank you for that rundown. I shared in the chat also just the link to the glossary. So if anyone here has any more questions on those, feel free to just write them in the chat, and we can certainly
Amazing.
go.
Thank you.
Of course. Now you mentioned that Silo is kind of like the Beanstalk DAO, where it uses the stack system to create this like protocol native financial incentives that improve both the protocol security as well as the Beans liquidity and stability. I'd love it if you could share a bit more about how you're thinking of this on-chain governance and the impact that it has on the protocol state. Thinking particularly of questions like who can participate, what is needed for a proposal to go through. Could you do a proposal on anything in the protocol, or is it limited to a few areas? Trying to better understand how that governance looks like for the protocol itself.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know, Beanstalk was originally deployed in August of 2021, and about 8 months later, there was a large exploit. And up until that point, it was growing very rapidly in the weeks leading up to that exploit on April Sunday, actually, in 2022. And Beanstalk, the original version of Beanstalk, was deployed with on-chain governance, and that was the, again, as we talk about permissionless fiat stablecoin protocol, the goal of Beanstalk is to be a totally autonomous system governed by stockholders. And unfortunately, it was that very philosophy and the implementation of on-chain governance that led to that exploit. So currently, when Beanstalk was relaunched a few months later, towards the end of 2022, the Beanstalk contract is owned by a multisig called the Beanstalk Community Multisig, and the DAO governs the various processes for how that multisig works. But of course, the eventual goal, and personally, from my perspective, the existence of that multisig is of course a bug and not a feature. As far as who can participate, I think I mentioned earlier, it's permissionless to join the DAO. Anyone can use the use the Beanstalk UI to buy and deposit assets into the silo to earn stock. But what is currently permissioned due to that multisig is the proposal and execution of upgrades. But the DAO is still voting just as it was pre-exploit. There are just some differences structurally due to the fact that this multisig now exists. I see there's a question. T-Sean says, what was the root cause of the last governance exploit on Beanstalk? I can refer you to some really good resources and articles that go into the details there, better than I could talk about here. And what mitigation strategy has been put in place? Well, the existence of the multisig eliminates any of the risks associated with the security of on-chain governance. Of course, there are risks associated with centralization, and of course, those aren't really in scope of the audit, but it's certainly something we're thinking about a lot as people who work on Beanstalk. But I'll drop some links in the Discord channel.
Nice, yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
And would also add that,
yeah, go ahead.
With the multisig, given that Beanstalk is a credit-based system, although there is centralization risk, there's a disincentive for the multisig to, collude against the Beanstalk DAO. The moment it does, all credibility of Beanstalk will vanish. So there's a very strong alignment between, or economic incentive for the Beanstalk anonymous assigners to do what the Beanstalk DAO does, or I guess votes to do.
Nice. That makes sense.
And just to give the quick version of the root cause, it's that the acquisition of stock was not implemented to be flash loan resistant. So the moment that a proposal could be passed, $1 billion was borrowed through a flash loan to acquire stock, use that stock to vote and pass a proposal, and then, of course, this proposal was malicious.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful to get an overview. Within these this silo component specifically, what are some key concerns that auditors should be mindful when auditing?
You want to take that one, Brain, from a security perspective?
Yes. So in the scope of this audit, the main concerns has to do with the Sunrise itself, the ability to manipulate the seed values of the of the distribution, of how it changes, within that scope. Granted, that's only the actor there is only the Sunrise caller, so I guess the scope of that isn't as big as the latter, which is the Germination update. The Germination update, what we're worried about there is the ability to circumvent the warm-up period, and particularly circumventing to also update, or I guess affect, the distribution of seeds there.
Nice. Thank you. And would it be is this the same concerns that people should have for the Sun component as well, or are these specific to the silo?
Yes, both of them generally have the same concerns, generally because both components of the silo and the Sun has to do, in part with the gauge system.
All right, sounds good. Cool. So we're about to head over to the end of at least my interview portion. We'll move over to questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat, and I'll be reading them out loud for our panelists here to answer. But before we dive into that, would be great if you could give us a bit of a demo of launching this project locally, so the auditors here can know how to get started quick and taking a look at what you guys have produced.
Yeah, let me share my screen real quick. Can anyone see the terminal?
Yep, we're in there.
Great. So this is the, so you can see in my CLI, this is the repository for the audit. Beanstalk, the Beanstalk repo itself is a mono repo. So it contains both the Solidity code as well as the UI, the subgraph, and any in between. we're focused on the protocol part. So, you can just cd into protocol here and then install the libraries. We use Yarn to install it. I already have it all installed, so it's very fast, but typically it takes a couple minutes. Once you install the libraries, you have to generate. We have a script called Yarn generate, and what this does is compiles the protocol as well as call this function, which generates the JSON file for Beanstalk itself. A couple other things you have to do is set up an RPC export, but that's covered in the instructions. As we're running test, you can use the command yarn test, and it will go through all the test suites that Beanstalk has. Now, like Guy mentioned, there's a lot of stuff that Beanstalk covers. In scope of this audit is just the silo and sun, but a lot of these tests has to do with the field, the barn, the market, the farm function, etc. So, tests, I guess, specifically for the gauge function, you can just search that using the grep function, and it will show up the gauge specific test there. Some other notable tests would be, I guess, a germination test as well as the weather test. In addition, I guess I haven't mentioned this part in the gauge system, but we added another, how do I say, axes to what Beanstalk evaluates. Beanstalk previously or currently only evaluates, using its price, its current time-weighted price, as well as, I'll stop this because it's kind of slow, as well as the debt level and the change in debt level. This update also includes the liquidity of Beanstalk itself. It does seem valuable to have that data fed into Beanstalk and change its state based off of that. So and the liquidity is also important to find the time-weighted liquidity, the liquidity of all the assets, getting a manipulation-resistant price associated with that, and there's other small tidbits that goes with that. But the main point is that the evaluation of Beanstalk has been upgraded to add that axis there. So the tests for that would probably be in weather, will be in weather, and it's probably something to keep in mind when auditing this project here.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that rundown, Brain. That was very helpful. So I don't see any new questions on the chat. If you have any, feel free to write them now. Joe, we went through yours when speaking about the sunrise functionality, but if there's anything that wasn't clear, feel free to rewrite it, and I'll, of course, make sure to bring it up for the panelists. We have one more from Zumba, who says, maybe I have missed, but can you please tell the contracts in scope which are not audited for even a single time?
It's a great question. In the case of the Beanstalk code base, there are no contracts that have been audited 0 times. Excuse me. So the impetus for this audit is the gauge system upgrade that Breen has talked about at length. And of course, Beanstalk and the current silo implementation is deployed on mainnet currently. And Cyfrin audited an initial version of the gauge system, which didn't include a lot of the changes that Breen just talked about, which include the germination changes, i.e. this warm-up period before you can earn beans from your deposit, etc. And so hopefully that's clear. There's a link to that initial audit report from Cyfrin at the bottom of the README, so I'd encourage you to check that out. And feel free to follow up if there's specific contracts you have questions about. But I redact what I said at the beginning. There definitely are at least a handful of contracts that have not been audited by anyone previously.
All right, nice.
And just going in depth, the germination has not been audited once. And going back to what Guy said, even though the C gauge has been audited by Cyfrin prior, this was audited without the germination update. I think it's important to audit, the C gauge again with the germination in place and other various upgrades we've put, just to ensure that everything does work. It's one thing to say that everything works in isolation, but then given Beanstalk is this live machine, very important to see every part work together in conjunction.
Yeah, makes sense for sure. We have another comment coming in from T-Sean who says that the forge commands aren't working. He's wondering if Breen, you could just maybe showcase how you're doing it, and that way he can unblock his local repository.
Yeah. So the current Beanstalk repo mainly uses Hardhat for our test suite. Foundry was initially pushed by the Beanstalk development community, but ultimately was kind of grandfathered like back and set to like sunsetted. And this was due to the fact that many of the Diamond standard tooling it's Hardhat based. Beyond our developers, our Solidity developers, we have front-end developers and subgraph engineers that are more proficient in JavaScript rather than Solidity. And for us, we also, have this internal test review where we have our non-Solidity engineers review the test suite as well, just to ensure that everything is okay with another set of eyes. We think it's important that, although Foundry is an amazing tool, we use, for example, we use Anvil to, create a fork scenario. We think that the larger set of eyes is much more valuable from our perspective there. Additionally, most of our tests were developed prior to Foundry being developed, and a significant amount of tests already were written in Hardhat. So, that's why we kind of stuck with Hardhat to this day.
Nice, thank you. Makes sense. And may I ask on this question, do you have any fuzzing tests at all then, or are you not doing fuzzing for your test coverage?
Yeah, currently I believe Hardhat does not support fuzzing, so that's there is a lack of fuzzing.
Okay, just wanted to double check there. All right, so without any more comments or questions, I guess that will be everything for today. Thank you so much, Guy and Breen, for taking us through the amazing work that you've done and showcasing a bit for auditors on how to get started, what things to look out for, get us familiar with the Beanstalk terminology, and hopefully giving everyone a bit of a better glimpse of what the scope is for this audit and what things to look out for. So if you have any questions, if you're here and you have any more questions that keep coming up, please join us in Discord. Guy, Breen will be there to help answer your questions, and we'll make sure that to make this as smooth of a ride as we possibly can. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.